Finance Chief Benjamin Diokno warns of a fiscal collapse if the government does not overhaul the military pension system.
The finance chief explained that retired personnel are getting an average monthly pension of 40,000 pesos. That's 9 times higher than what other government workers are receiving from the Social Security system.
So there will come a time when the current budget will only be about one third or 1/4 of the money that we're paying for the pensioners. Okay, so we have to really address that issue. It's not sustainable. And I said, if this goes on, there will be a fiscal collapse.
Finance Chief Ben Diokno says President Bongbong Marcos has approved the proposal to merge 2 state-run banks, the Landbank of the Philippines and the Development Bank of the Philippines.
Diokno defended the proposed merger, saying that the move will result in the country's biggest bank in terms of assets.
None of the services provided by either bank will be lost, and we assured him that with the merger, because both the Landbank and DBP are universal banks, they do almost the same, right? Except that one is focused on agri, the other one on industrial projects, but they do practically the same.
When the fiscal situation is tight, count on any sensible government to look for ways to save money. Here are 2 proposals from the Marcos administration: reform the military pension system and merge the country's 2 state-run banks. Does that make sense? Let's ask a global investment banker tonight on the Chiefs. And welcome to the Tuesday edition of The Chiefs. Ako po si Ed Lingao. Kasama natin ngayon sa studio si Ana Marie Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief ng Philippine Star. And we will be joined in a little bit by Robbie Alampay of One News. Happy Holy Week.
Happy Holy Week.
Parang mali ano sabihin?
Hindi dapat happy. Blessed Holy Week.
Okay, Blessed Holy Week. Okay. Well, huwag usapang pera tayo ngayon.
Medyo mahirap yung ano. Siguro we go straight na, no?
Oh, sige. Yeah. Well, it's Holy Tuesday. Maraming kailangan pagnilay-nilayan. Among them, not just spiritual things, but fiscal things as well.
Oh,
we will be talking to an expert in investments, but we will just go into a quick break, so please do stay with us. And welcome back to Chiefs. Finally, we are talking to him, we're bringing him in, global investment banker Stephen Kunyeng. Sir, maraming salamat for coming back to us tonight.
Well, thank you very much for being so kind to invite me again.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure to have you on board.
Yeah.
Sir, teka, ito kasi usapang kaperahan na naman eh. I'm sure you've read about it. I'm sure you've heard about it even before people started talking about it. Itong problema sa military pension system, well, not just military, the MUP, Military and Uniformed Personnel Pension System. 400,000 active duty personnel from AFP, PNP, Fire Protection, down the line Bucor, and then another 190,000 retirees. Problemado raw ang gobyerno with the system as it is right now, and Secretary Diokno is talking about a fiscal collapse. Can you give us a bit of a background as to how somebody like you would look at the system as it is right now?
First, I would look at history and what made this system be put in place. If you're old enough, I'm 64, you know there was the AFP RSBS
yes, sir,
system
SBS.
previously. And frankly, it was very badly run and went bankrupt. And the feeling was you couldn't do that to the soldiers who defend the country, put their lives at risk every day, same with the police. So they put this system in place where, in effect, you were guaranteed a certain rate and
yes,
a certain return. So if we're going back to a new version of the old system, where you have a partly contributory by the government, partly contributory by the people covered, how are you going to ensure what happened the last time doesn't happen again? So we might just end up in 20 years having the fund badly managed, underperforming, and then we're going to go back to the same situation. Because I sympathize with what the government is saying. Yes, it's becoming very expensive. Yes, the non-contributory, but let's look at, if you're a private sector employee, part of it is your contribution, part of it is your employers. But let's not forget the difference if you're a government employee, like if you're GSIS or you're military. Who
Yes, sir.
pays your salary anyway?
Yes, sir. Pero sir,
If the government pays the salary, then it's still 100%. Whether it's after salary, after deduction, or pre-deduction, the source of the money is still the
it's still
government.
taxpayers.
Well, whatever it is, the government. Because you see, if I was, let's say, working for ABC5 and I was in SSS, X% would be from my contribution, my sueldo, X ABC5. So you can say then it goes to SSS. But in this case, if the government is going to say, I'm going to give you this return, but all the money is coming from the government anyway, it's whether you're deducting it from the salary or putting it on top of the salary, but it's the same gobierno.
Yes, sir. Pero sir, pero siyempre sir, added expense if it's not from the actual salary. I mean, if it's salary plus their supposed contributions
my
coming
honest
from taxpayers.
opinion, no, it's one hand or the other. Supposing my salary is 20,000 a month, and the government gives me my pension, and it contributes, let's just say for the sake of argument, 4,000 a month, versus I paid 12,000 a month, and I contribute 2, and the government contributes 4. The government's still shelling out 14,000.
Yes, sir. Pero
But
sir,
the pay
yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Pero sir, that versus, for example, 20,000, kunwari yung basic salary, and then government shells out additional 4,000 instead of the 4,000 coming from the 20,000. So nagiging 24,000 versus 16,000.
No, I mean, then you're increasing the salary. Then the total amount the government is giving you, and the total is 24 rather than 20. So my point is, at the end of the day, the key point is two things. How well will the fund be run this time compared to last time? Which is the same thing I told you, Maharlika. Everybody's concentrating on the structure, which there's already enough issues with, without discussing the management and the quality of the management. So the fund, RSBS, was making a lot of money and being run well. This wouldn't have become a problem. So now we're going to go back to an RSBS-like system, but nobody's talking about how the fund will be managed and by who. That's number one. Number two, when we talk about the contribution versus non-contributory, I'm not saying it shouldn't be contributory or it should. All I'm saying is in many countries, the special role the armed forces and the police play, where they are, unlike an ordinary employee, whether government or private sector, they are putting their lives at risk every day for us. And that is deserving of some kind of special recognition and treatment, which is why, like, for example, in the US, you have the Veterans Administration Hospital free. If I was a retiree in the US, I'd have to pay Medicare. If I was in the private sector, I'd have to buy health insurance. But if I'm in the military, I have the Veterans Administration. So there, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not saying we're not facing a fiscal cliff on government, on the retirement benefits for the military. I understand that's an issue, but I also understand the reason why this non-contributory system was put in place to begin with. It is because people who put their lives at risk for our safety are deserving of something beyond what a normal retiree gets.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Does it have to be reformed? I agree. Okay, it has to be reformed. But we shouldn't just say you compare soldiers and police to an employee, government or private, because they are putting their lives at risk, and that is deserving of some special treatment.
Mr. Kuunhing, apart from yung hindi nga daw nagko-contribute yung mga soldiers natin, which you're saying is standard in most countries, no? Ang sinasabi ni Ben Jokno yung indexation, he wants to change it by legislation Kasi it's pegged to the current salary rates. So yung pensioner from 20 years ago, yung tinatanggap niya, kapag tinaasan yung sweldo nung active duty, akyat din lahat ng pension niya. Kaya nagdodoble-doble daw, ang laki-laki na daw.
I agree with you on the specifics that there are things maybe it's too far, sa kabila naman, sobra naman, to say balansahin natin. But I do wish to put up 2 points as we fine-tune the system. One is soldiers and military and police are deserving of special treatment because of the nature of their jobs and putting their lives at risk, which is different from any other employee. Pangalawa, what got us to this situation in the first place? Are we going back to a situation where the same thing can happen on the management of the fund? Yung provisions, reform, indexation, all that, I agree, it's valid. Okay? Now, however, one of the things I felt frankly very sad about when I was listening to the report of Jokno saying they're getting 40,000 pesos a month on average versus 12,000 for GSIS versus 4,000 for SSS. One side to look at it to say, wow, laki ng 40 compared to 13 and compared to 4. The answer is, can you live on 4,000 a month? Can you live even on 13,000 a month today? Maybe is the answer the performance of the other pension funds should also be studied, because imagine if I'm contributing every month and after that 4,000 lang ang kikita ang bibigyan sa akin every month. Can you live on 4,000 even for 1 week? So is it not, I mean, one way I want to rephrase the question, is 40,000 too much or is 13,000 and 4,000 too little?
Too small, yes. Yes, that's a good
So
point.
you're saying dapat din may reform sa ibang sa salary scales ng sa pension.
I don't have the exact figures, but what is the return on assets on the GSIS and SSS historically and recent? Because part of the problem is not the level of contribution. Part of the problem is the return being given. Number one, the compliance. I'm told a lot of employers are not fully compliant on paying their share of the contribution, yet SSS has to shell it out. And then second, the return on investment, the return on the funds. What is it? Can we analyze that too? Because if we're going to that system where we're not guaranteeing it, yes, all right. But imagine if you put all that money every month, every paycheck, and after you retire, 4,000 lang kikitain mo.
Yeah.
13,000. So is the question 40,000 too high or 13 and 4,000 commensurate to the amount you put in during your life, your employment life, too low?
Yeah. Sir, let's bring in Robbie Alampay of One News. He's joining us now.
Hi, good evening, sir. Apologies, I'm late to the discussion. But I'm glad I got in as you were saying these real things, real perspectives that people should not lose sight of. Because in the past few days, we've spoken with politicians, we've spoken with policymakers, we've spoken with financial people as well. And they all also agree that, we know why we got here and we know why it's hard. And basically, everybody's acknowledging it's the politics that's hard. We can make sense of the math, the finances, and so on. But the reality is politics also got us here. And we need to find a political way out. I'm glad that you acknowledged, some political considerations on either side as well, some very human considerations as well. I wanted you to expound on that, siguro by way of also giving our political leaders maybe something political to bite on, right? Something to hang on to in terms of, look, these are constituents as well who are receiving 4,000 in pension. These are
Exactly.
constituents as well.
Look at all the money they put in, and they get 4,000 back a month. Is that good? Number one. So what is part of the solution? Okay, the US system on Social Security is the same. It's returned regardless of what the fund accomplishes. All right? And sometimes you have to make up something. But what have some of the more innovative countries like Chile done? They said, and same thing in Hong Kong with the mandatory, okay, let's use simpler one. Hong Kong, mandatory provident fund. There used to be no mandatory pension in Hong Kong. Now, for the last 20 years, there is. But who manages the mandatory pension fund? Do you know?
Yes, sir.
It's up to the person. He can put it with HSBC. He can put it with Citibank. He can put it with Fidelity. He can put it with Agricultural Bank of China. He chooses, and he can shift. And so the investment decisions are based on who gets the best results. Not just best because nagtataya sila, because their guidelines, you cannot buy risky assets, you cannot do this, you cannot, but within that constraint, who runs it the most professionally and gives me the best returns? And Chile does the same thing. They're basically saying it's mandatory that you contribute, it's mandatory that the employer contributes part, but the employee chooses which manager manages his pension, and he does well, he benefits. The person, the manager does badly, the employee suffers. But at least it is no longer a depoliticized, government standardized political decisions, because it is in effect given to the employee to choose from a menu of managers.
Pero sir, wouldn't that also require financial literacy na medyo mahina tayo? Kahit ako, mahina ako dun.
Now, everybody's successful mahina. So then, what happens if you're mahina? You go to names you trust. You would probably go to one of the big banks in the Philippines who says, on average, itong binibigay ko. But on financial literacy, you bring up a completely valid point, which is why the guidelines for the Hong Kong mandatory provident fund says you cannot just buy any speculative debt instrument, stock, or commodities. There is a basket that is limited to what you can put.
Okay.
And within that basket, it's up to the fund manager. So now, everybody is competing on a broad field, and how they narrowly choose to concentrate within that broad field is up to each professional manager. So like HSBC is a very big manager in Hong Kong, Fidelity is a very big manager, BlackRock, but rather than it's a group of government appointees of sometimes good, sometimes maybe not as good, and pressured to make this kind of decision because all the money is in one pot. The employee can choose where to put it within the structure and the constraints. So now, if I went to a government employee or a police person and said, this is the reform, but ngayon, it's not, we have minimized the chances of what happened to RSBS happening again. And we can go to someone who's in the SSS system or the GSIS based on your contribution. This is the returns various people have gotten. Pumili ka. Now, you can say, what's the initial return going to be if we do this? I can go to any of the major banks' trust departments and say, on your average, what have your trust accounts, how have they performed?
Okay. What would be the downside to that? I mean, just to pick your brains, if you could actually stand on the other side of that argument, at least from the perspective of why wouldn't it be that simple to just adopt it in the Philippines?
Well, it is simple. It's whether the people want to give up control of all that pot of money until it's paid out. That's number one. Number two, one can argue that if we are not careful in who we accredit to manage the money, might end up even being worse. The other argument could be if part of the money should be used for nation building and so on and so forth, then having it all in one big pool of funds, centrally managed, will help with that. But let's just say you can argue both sides, but you decide which one you think is more attractive and more prudent. Now, if the government has a history of delivering stellar returns, the government pension funds, then by all means continue. If it isn't, maybe you reform that, or you do a hybrid system, or you do neither. I'm just saying that the way we are talking about it assumes it's always going to be one fund, government managed. I'm just saying there is nothing wrong with that. Countries like the US, Singapore do it that way, Malaysia, there's nothing wrong. I'm just saying it is not the only option. And if we're going to discuss reforming these systems, shouldn't we be more encompassing and analytical of what these other alternatives have delivered for their people? Now, in Hong Kong, there was no political pressure to have the government only run it because they only started this mandatory provident fund regime in the late 1990s.
Well, in fact, you are talking about an encompassing reform of the pension system. Because of this focus on the military pension, yung mga health workers, nagsasalita na rin sabi nila bakit hindi lang naman sila naglelay their lives on the line? You saw what happened during the pandemic. What do you think is the practice in other countries?
No, okay. In the practice, okay, pandemic and health workers are an exception. Okay. And in most countries, while they're not the highest paid people, they are paid a premium for their skill and for their service. So they do get more than, let's say, a normal person. Now, all I can say is in most countries, people who on a daily basis for the entire career are in a profession where they put their lives at risk on a daily basis have generally been given some special treatment. That's all. I'm not saying you shouldn't put others. I'm not saying they're not valid, but I'm just saying there has always been a clear delineation that you owe something to military and police above other people.
Yes, sir.
Because of the riskiness of the job. But yeah, healthcare workers, yes, but absent of pandemic, is being a healthcare worker as risky as being a frontline soldier. I don't think anybody would argue that.
Sir, of course, I understand what you're saying, and I think we all agree on that we should give a premium to those who are in the front line. But at the same time, and I think this applies to all people who are in the emergency services or in the frontline services, hindi po lahat ng, for example, sundalo at police ay nasa frontline. You're in a modern army, not even a third of your force is deployed in the front line. A big chunk of them are in logistics or in admin.
No, I am not arguing.
Yes, sir. And yes, sir. I understand, sir. I'm just saying the same naman goes with health workers. Not everybody is also in the front line. So baka it's also difficult to maghimay na itong sektor na ito lahat sila nandun.
What I'm just saying is historically, military and police have been treated differently by other governments. If you want to say we want to fine-tune it further, go ahead. You don't want to, go ahead. I'm just giving you an example.
Yes,
now,
sir.
Number two, but the answer to your question is perhaps one of the things that we looked at is the availability to choose who manages your pension, which Hong Kong does, which Chile does, and some European countries do. And it's a way to say, you chose well within these parameters, you benefit. You didn't choose well, then don't blame us.
Mag-move na tayo.
Yeah, sige, let's move.
Yes,
Sir, marami pag-uusapan, sir. Marami
pa kasi mga fiscal
Give you a
Fiscal
different answer
issues,
from
yes.
what's expected, but I just felt nobody was touching those aspects.
Actually,
Okay.
sir, those are very good points.
Yeah.
And we take note of them kasi those are things that nobody's brought up.
Oo nga, actually, hindi pa namin.
It's a good thing that you brought it
I
up.
try not to repeat what everybody else is saying, and because you were kind enough to suggest the topics, I respect my hosts and my viewers enough to actually read up and prepare ahead of time.
And we appreciate that, sir. Certainly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. But sir, I think we'll just go into a quick break, so please do stay with us.
Welcome back to the Chief. Still with us via Zoom, Stephen Kuhn-Hing, an international investment banker. Mr. Kuhn-Hing, before the break, no, another controversy, yung tungkol sa proposal, of course, also of Benjamin Jokno, to merge the Land Bank and the Development Bank of the Philippines. Now, it has raised concerns, baka daw ma-dilute yung mga functions of one bank. What are your thoughts on this?
All right. Let me again put perspective. This was a law passed during the second President Aquino's time. Secretary Dominguez agreed with it, and now Secretary Jokno agrees with it. So, in fairness, this is not a Secretary Jokno controversy. He is fulfilling law and something that was passed 2 administrations ago and agreed to by his predecessors. It's just been left with him to implement it or abandon it, and he has chose to implement it. Now,
Okay.
listen carefully to his press conference. What was his biggest point? First, nandyan na yung batas, number 1. But number 2 is, given the latest crisis with Credit Suisse and all that, bigger is better, is what he's saying. And you cannot be big enough. So first, maybe this leads into Maharlika later, but so I suppose you better not get the profits of the banks and of the Maharlika, because you want to make them bigger, they're not big enough. So let's be intellectually consistent here. But second, there's a difference between being sufficiently big and being big for the sake of being big. Okay? Because if we go by these standards, we are puny, period. Silicon Valley Bank, which is a tiny bank by US standards, was bigger than the biggest bank in the Philippines by asset size. So by global standards, we're tiny, even if we make it the biggest. So the point really is, are you big enough for the market that you are in? But you don't have to be an artificial size to meet the criteria. Okay? Because by any criteria, then we should not have any banks because they're all too small, even regionally. You look at the asset size of the big banks, even in Thailand, we're triple, quadruple the size of our biggest banks. All right? So my point is, so there is validity to the argument of size, but it is not an absolute point. It is a safety point, not bigger is always better. Because let's put it this way. Again, I go back to one thing I've harped on every time you've been kind enough to ask me, and this is my 3rd time to appear in the show. It's again competence. Structure and policy are one thing. The quality of the management and the implementation, which nobody ever seems to talk about. If I have a very big bank and I ruin it, I have a very big ruined bank. If I have a very big bank and I grow it, I have a spectacular big bank. But I'm still capable of running it well, running it mediocre, or running it terribly. And more now, yes, there is some scale that is needed, and government banks need to be big. All right? Because they have a purpose. But is Landbank big enough on its own? Yes. Is DBP big enough on its own? Yes. Is it a necessity to merge? No. is it this desire? If it does lead to better management and better results, yes. But as an end in itself, are big enough already. So again, I have no objections to merging. I have no objections to keeping them separate. My real question is, what are the return on assets and return on equity on both banks? What is the percent of non-performing loans? What is the loan to deposit ratio? All the measures used to ascertain whether a bank is effective and efficient or not. Again, nobody is concentrating on those.
Sir Bale, what you're saying is size could help, but it's how you use it.
Okay, maybe let me paraphrase it a bit. Lack of size is
Ikaw ang
not
nagsabi nun.
I'm just putting it in layman's terms.
but size is a prerequisite. But it doesn't mean I've doubled the size, I'll be twice as good or twice as.
Yeah, certainly.
But maybe it's okay. On this thing, let me quote my favorite line from Yogi Berra. He said, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is.
Okay, now let me get to something that you already alluded to. This framing, what does it do to their arguments and their positioning for the Maharlika investment fund, the investment fund? If you take the values and the mandate and the direction here, and the purported values and mission and promises for the investment fund, whatever you call it, however you think of it now, what does that framing tie them to and corner them to, at least in how you look at this proposed investment fund?
Well, if bigger is better, and we're in a period of financial uncertainty, then I think it's time to say goodbye to the government, financial institutions, and the BSP contributing Maharlika. Now, if you need to save face, since that seems to be important to many people, then you can say events of the last 60 days has changed from where things were last year. But if you're saying, I need to get bigger so that I'm safer, if you're saying the Bangko Sentral needs more bala to be bigger so we can be safer, so what? We'll give the profits to Maharlika.
Are you actually seeing more clarity now in the proposal for the Maharlika?
We haven't seen anything. I mean, apart from the initial bill filed by Senator Villar and
Yes.
I think the not very well thought out bill passed by Congress, I haven't seen anything. They haven't had hearings yet. Now, when the hearings come, and to the credit of some of the leaders in Congress, they have said, yes, you know, it's time to have a redo. And that's why I joke, why is our legislative system fire, ready, aim, rather than the other way around?
Most urgently, what points do you need to clarify? Which points do you need?
Okay, this is my opinion. I'm not saying I'm correct. It is my opinion. I don't agree with the Congress version. I think the way initially set forth by the president, which was the Philippine-focused development fund, makes sense.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, we're going to do it so that it is successful. I suggest we do it the way Indonesia did, which is Indonesia is the largest shareholder, but a minority. They brought in a lot of foreign asset managers and multilateral institutions and put in professional and professionally compensated managers. Now that is the way, because let me explain something. How much do you think Maharlika should be? They were saying 4 billion, 5 billion. Do you think that's big? That's tiny. You know, you have to get to number 37 among asset managers to go below 1 trillion under management.
Sir, that's pesos?
Peso or
dollars?
Dollars, $1 trillion.
So that's 50 trillion.
The first 36 fund managers in the world all manage tens of trillions, and number 36 manages over 1 trillion. So now, let's assume you have $5 billion, okay? You want to chase a good deal globally like envisioned in the Congressional Fund. you'll be given the best deals when somebody with 10 trillion is chasing the same deal.
Okay.
So now, where do we have a comparable advantage? A Philippine Development Fund, where we have the Philippine expertise, we have the access, we have the knowledge. And those trillion-dollar funds will say, makikisakay ako sa Maharlika. Versus the other way, Maharlika, makikisakay ako kay BlackRock, kay Fidelity. That's my view. My view is a Philippine-focused development fund, with the government as the largest but not majority shareholder, like the Indonesian model, is for me overall what would be the best for the Philippines.
Sir, just to simplify, sir, what you're looking at is all these other people outside coming in instead of us going out.
Yes, because you know what? If we want to go out, SSS and JS already do that.
Yeah.
Why do you need to create something new? They already do it. Then, tell them to do more of it. Tell them to hire people with direct expertise to do it themselves.
And we get your point.
Something new to do that.
And we get your point that, as you said, that's our comparative advantage. We know our needs better. We know the opportunities better where we are. We know the stakeholders. But bring us now to the governance and to the management of this, even in our own backyard. Because then now, as the money comes in, how do we assure people that we are identifying the right projects? How do we make sure that we're taking care of their money here at home?
Okay, let's start with number one. If you hire the right managers, and the right managers are answerable to a broad professional board as well, not majority government people who can be pressured by politicians and government officials, then it's likely to be better. Because you have to understand as well, if you want to go abroad, do the abroad thing, you know how much the best fund manager was paid last year? Ray Dalio, $1.1 billion was his sweldo and bonus.
Wow.
Uy.
Okay, so you're going to compete with that kind of. I'm telling you honestly, you're a CEO of a big fund management company that manages over $1 trillion. Maliit na yung $100 million na total pay package. Okay? I mean, it's their public statement. I'm not saying it's the correct number, but I'm saying it's so now. However, you're competing on the Philippines. Let's try to do it like Indonesia. Only a minority of the ownership and a minority of the board is Indonesian government. The majority are the multilateral institutions and the asset managers who comprise 60% of the fund. Now, if the government cannot dictate on the private sector, but the private sector will not want to do a deal on the board that the government does not agree on, is that not maybe a more appropriate balance? And if you have that kind of system, plus competitive pay, don't you think you'll be able to attract good managers who would be willing to stay long-term, regardless of which administration is in power, so that there would be professionalism and continuity?
Competitive pay here in the Philippines, I really don't know. In terms of the Constitution, all our rules and so on, when you say competitive pay for a concept like this, is that literally, no holds barred, or does our current setup of governance, and for that matter, the Constitution actually?
Well, if it's majority private sector owned, and it's a private sector company that the government owns 40% of, then all those salary standardization and legal restrictions go away, right? If the guy gives lousy returns for the pay he's made, then fire him.
Mr. Cunyon, just to round off this conversation, there's a proposal to use the Maharlika to fund the pension fund of the military and uniformed personnel. What do you think of that proposal?
Well, I mean, if the Maharlika is doing well, fine, but Maharlika doesn't even exist yet. We don't even know. And we don't even know where it's... Okay, here's the problem with putting solutions that are not carefully thought out together. What is the most important thing in a retirement fund? It's not return. It is the ability to fund pensions as they come due. So you are willing to, you have to balance the portfolio so that some are long-dated debt, some are short-dated debt, some are liquid equities, some can be private equity, but you always have to have cash flow sufficient to fund the projected pension payments balanced against the contributions. Now, if Maharlika is just starting and we don't know what they're putting the money in, will it match the actuarial needs of the pension, of the military pension? I don't know.
Well, they're proposing it kasi nga, they don't want to push through there's a lot of resistance to making the MUP, the military and uniformed personnel, contribute from their salaries for their pension. And
Okay, then
people
what
are
will
looking
happen?
for a source
No,
now
but then I'm
without
saying,
touching.
all I'm saying is, in the end, babayaran mo din. Okay? Like, I gave a speech one and somebody asked me, can you come up with any short-term suggestions? I said, yes, no more short-term suggestions.
Mahirap yan.
Short-term. You look at China, you look at Singapore. They have 20-year plans, 50-year plans that they monitor every 2, 3 years, every 5 years, so that there is short-term execution targets, but there's a goal. So my point is, we just say, oh, we have an immediate problem, let's get an immediate solution, even though it actually makes a long-term problem bigger.
So what might be a least painful solution to this problem, this fiscal collapse? Kasi sabi ni Senator Antonio Trillanes, you're playing with fire. You're going to touch the pensions of so many military and uniformed personnel retirees.
I'm also a little tired of too much melodrama and politics. I'd like to have more analysis and less dramatic.
Sige. What are the possibilities?
The simplest is, there are many possibilities. One is you make it contributory, but you turn it over to private options like Hong Kong and Chile. Another one is basically you have a depoliticized professional commission that decides who will be the managers, who are the targets. So, and with fixed terms, for example, like what is the theory why you give a judge a lifetime appointment? You can choose to retire early, but until they reach 70, you cannot force a judge to retire. Why? So that theoretically, he's no longer pressured to make decisions this way or that way, because he cannot be removed. So maybe if you want it to remain in government hands, you give the people who are running these things and their supervisory board fixed terms and staggered fixed terms, so that a new administration comes in, you don't change everybody in the pension fund. You have staggered terms. Let's say 1/3 of the board. Let's just say you give the board members and you give the management 5 or 10-year contracts, and you basically tell them the board itself will be replaced 1/3 at a time or 1/4 at a time. Whatever. There are ways to insulate. If you wanted to stay in one pool, you wanted to stay government controlled and managed, which is perfectly justified. Okay? I'm not saying it has to be the private fund manager way like Hong Kong or Chile, but I'm saying if you want to do it that way, then maybe you insulate the management and the board from political whims.
Okay.
And professionalize it. That's another way.
Okay.
A third is not to say Santiago principles, which is good governments, but to say it has to be this, it has to be that, it has to be that. You also limit what they can invest in.
Sige. Mr. Konying, speaking of long-term, speaking of trying to look beyond the current challenges, here we go again. Congress talking about charter change again. Do you think that has to factor into anything that we want to have a long-term vision for, or be set up for something more stable and something that sets us up foundationally?
Let me answer you two parts. One is, are we talking about just economic changes or wholesale changes for the Constitution?
Well, let's assume na economic changes. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying.
Let's assume it's possible.
Let's assume that's even possible.
Let me tell you about economic changes only. What is the number one, number two, number three, number four, number five reason investors invest, whether international or local?
Ease of doing business?
No, profit.
Profit.
Wala kang pake, it can be as easy to do it. If it's so easy and I'll lose all my money, what do I
Okay,
do?
okay, capitalist lang
Only
siya.
profit. Okay? Profit. If hindi ako kikita, hindi ako papasok. If I'm going to make a lot of money, I'll put up with a lot of trouble. I would have used a four-letter word, but never mind. We're on TV.
Okay.
Okay, let me give you examples. The star for direct foreign investment for the last 10 years has been Vietnam. So, are they open? Telecom is 100% government. Not 100% Vietnamese. 100% government. All right? Telecom. Electricity distribution and transmission is 100% government. Okay, banks, foreign ownership is limited to 30% and an individual foreign shareholder 15%, unless it's a failed bank and the central bank in Vietnam allows you to buy. So with all, and there's no land. It's only 99-year long-term leases because all land is owned by the government. But everybody's coming in. Why? Kasi kumikita sila. So for me, economic provisions, unless you're making money, it's not going to do anything.
Okay.
If you're making money, they're coming in already anyway. Now, if the economic provisions are so restricted that you will not make money or you cannot do any business, okay. But ease, restrictions, all that stuff, kailangan kumita ka muna.
Okay, but to that point, just what was the secret sauce, or it's not even secret sauce for Vietnam? I mean, what was the thing that unleashed the investments coming in?
Okay, I'll say to my experience for Thailand, for Vietnam, or Malaysia, what was it? And Indonesia. First, I'm sorry to say this. This is the sin that dates back to the Bataan nuclear plant and the aftermath after. Cheap power. It's not democracy, not dictatorship, not parliamentary. It's cheap power. You know why? Let's say I do a steel mill that's really iron ore to billets. The first thing, 40 to 55% of my operating costs in heavy manufacturing is power. If your power is already 20 to 30% above your neighbors, to begin with, minus 15 to 20 ka na. I'm just being very simple. Power is 30% cheaper in Indonesia and about 20 to 25% cheaper in Thailand. And the same thing in Vietnam. So that starts with that. Second, infrastructure. If I have, how do I transport my goods to the rest of the country, to my factories if I have a supply chain, or export it? If it's going to take more time and more money, why should I? Let me give you an example. Why do so many people use pawn shops and remittance centers to send their money rather than banks? Right? I asked before when I was living in Hong Kong, one of a domestic worker told me, sir, if I put it in this bank, first kailangan may minimum deposit. And kailangan ng pamilya ko yung buong sweldo every 2 weeks. Okay? That's number one. Number two, they said, yung asawa ko has to take tricycle ride, a bus, and then another tricycle ride or jeep to go to the bank. Yung pawn shop at remittance, isang motorsiklo lang nandyan ako. So when you factor all these costs, it's cheaper to use a remittance center rather than a bank. because where the banks are located, where their branches, there's enough depositors, all that. Now, I'm not blaming the banks, I'm not blaming the remittance centers, I'm explaining what total cost means. It's not just the fee, it's not just the rate. So now, if I'm, let's say, a manufacturer rather than service, and I'm going to move my goods wherever, domestically, to another factory that's going to finish it, to export, to sell, we're going to factor all that cost in. Then on top of that comes government, ease of doing business, corruption, all that other stuff. But you start out first with kikita pa ako o hindi. And there are two ways you decide that. One is, what is my cost of production? Second, what is my cost of transport and distribution? Then you get the wages, you get the productivity, you get the quality of the workforce, ease, all that stuff. But you start with those two. If you have a set heavy manufacturing, half of your cost is power. So if you start out 30% more, you're already off by 15% compared to your regional competitors. Now, how can you compete? Change the constitution. Wala pa rin. You're still 15% more expensive.
Always interesting to have you, sir, on board.
Always. And
Ang sarap
Let me
mag-
say
always
one more thing
enlightening.
about- Let me say one more thing about constitutional change, okay? In the 1990s, Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, because they also transitioned from dictatorship to democracy like the Philippines, had a one-term president. All of them changed it to 2 4-year terms. Ramos tried, he failed, and people have made noises. Why did those 3 Latin American countries succeed? In the midterm election, they made it a campaign issue that they wanted to be able to re-elect the president. And when the party won, they could claim it is vetted by the people and there is mandate. So if we want constitutional change, whether political, economic, both, whatever, why doesn't a party or the administration campaign on it in the midterm? And if they win, everybody will say, yes, you have a mandate to do it. Rather than, we don't know, gusto ba ng tao, ayaw ng tao, everything. Let it be a big, I mean, it's only a fundamental change. Campaign on it. And then you have a mandate or you don't. That's what Brazil, Peru, and Argentina did in the early 1990s. And they changed it because there was a mandate of, resounding mandate of the people by giving majorities to the party of the president who campaigned on that to get it. So whether you want economic change or political change, why don't you have the gut to make it an issue and get a mandate to do it? Then whether assembly, convention, everything is secondary because the will of the people has been sought.
Okay. Mr. Stephen Konying, as Ed said, always enlightening, always fascinating.
Sarap kausap parate.
Thank you again for inviting me. Hopefully next time in person.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
And when you
Certainly.
do that next time, it will be charter change. We will be talking to you about charter change. Maraming salamat po.
Before I became an investment banker, I was a lawyer.
Okay. Sige, maraming salamat po. That's all we have. That's all we have for the
Thank you.
Chiefs. We hope to discuss. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.